My wife had a strange habit. Every time we finished making love, she would get up, quietly lock the room, and say nothing. I never questioned it, until one day, I did. And what I discovered behind that locked door changed everything I thought I knew about her. Stay with me until the end, because this story will leave you shocked. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. My name is David, and being married to Sarah is the happiest time of my life. Yet somehow, they've only been married for 8 months. These 8 months should have been the most confusing. You see, Sarah is different from other women I've dated. She's quiet and gentle, the kind of woman who speaks softly and moves cautiously, afraid to disrupt the atmosphere. When we first met at a coffee shop downtown, she was reading a book about ancient history, completely absorbed in the pages. I was immediately drawn to her calmness, her peace. After 3 years of dating loud, dramatic women who turned every conversation into a battlefield, Sarah felt like stepping into a monastery. Silence, but the good kind. The kind that doesn't need to be filled with meaningless chatter. Our courtship was simple. Walks in the park, quiet dinners, long conversations about books and dreams. She never raised her voice, never complained, never demanded anything from me. When I proposed after 6 months, she smiled softly and said yes, like she'd been expecting it all along. The wedding was small, just our immediate families and a few close friends. Sarah's side was surprisingly sparse. When I asked about extended family, she simply said they lived far away and couldn't make it. But it was after our wedding night that I first noticed the habit. We'd made love for the first time as husband and wife, and as I lay there catching my breath, feeling closer to her than ever before, she did something that struck me as odd. She got up from the bed, walked to the door, and turned the lock. Not before we were intimate, not during, but after. Always after. I thought maybe she was just being cautious, ensuring our privacy. We were staying at all, but when a hotel that night, after we moved into our apartment and the pattern continued, I began to wonder. Every single time, without fail, she would complete the same ritual. Make love, get up, lock the door, return to bed, and curl up with her back to me. The first few weeks, I convinced myself it was normal. Maybe she'd grown up in a house where privacy was scarce, where locked doors meant safety. Maybe it was just a quirk, like how some people have to check that the stove is off 3 times before leaving the house, rituals that make us feel secure. But as we all have our little habits, the months passed. The behavior began to feel more deliberate, more purposeful. It wasn't casual or absent-minded. She would lie there for a moment after we finished, completely still, as if listening for something. Then she would rise, move to the door with careful, measured steps, and turn that lock with the precision of someone performing a sacred ceremony. One night, about 3 months into our marriage, I decided to test something. As she got up to perform her ritual, I reached for her hand. "Stay with me a little longer," I whispered, trying to pull her back down to the bed. The look that flashed across her face in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever seen from her. It wasn't annoyance or even mild irritation. It was something closer to panic, raw and desperate. She gently but firmly removed her hand from mine in a moment. She said, soft, continued to the door. Justly, but there was steel beneath the silk of her voice. She locked the door, returned to bed, and when I tried to bring it up the next morning, she changed the subject so smoothly that I almost forgot what I'd wanted to ask. That was when I started paying closer attention to other things. Small details that had seemed insignificant before began to form a pattern. Sarah never left the apartment after dark. Not once in 8 months had she stepped outside after sunset, no matter the reason. When I suggested evening walks or late dinners out, she would smile and suggest we do it the next day instead. She also never invited anyone over. Not friends, not family, not even neighbor's door looking for a cup who knocked on our of sugar. She would speak to them through the door, always polite, always apologetic about not being able to help. When I asked about her friends from before we married, she said she'd grown apart from them, that marriage had changed her priorities. Her sleep patterns were strange too. She would fall asleep quickly after locking the door, but around 3 in the morning, almost every night, I would wake to find her sitting still, staring at the door, up in bed, perfectly. When I asked if she was all right, she would lie back down and say she was just checking something. Checking what? The lock was secure. The door was closed. What was she checking for? The phone calls started around month 4, always during the day when she thought I was at work. I came home early one afternoon with a headache and heard her voice through the door, speaking in hushed, urgent tones. The conversation stopped the moment I turned my key in the lock. When I entered, she was sitting calmly on the couch, reading the same book she'd been reading when we met. No phone in sight. "Who were you talking to?" I asked casually. She looked up with those wide, innocent eyes and said, "Nobody, darling. You must have heard the television." But the television was off, and there was something in her expression that made my stomach tighten. I began to notice that she had 2 distinct personalities. There was daytime Sarah, who was present and engaged, who cooked my favorite meals and asked about my work and laughed at my jokes. And there was nighttime Sarah, who emerged after we made love, who performed her locking ritual with religious devotion and then retreated into herself until morning. The really unsettling part was how she seemed to transform the moment that lock clicked into place. Her posture would change, becoming more rigid, more alert. Her breathing would shift from the soft, relaxed rhythm of contentment to something more measured, more controlled. It was as if locking that door activated some other version of my wife, some version that was waiting, watching, protecting us from something I couldn't see. Month 6 brought the whispers. I would wake in the deep hours of the night to hear her talking softly, but when I listened closely, I couldn't make out words. It sounded almost like a prayer, but in a language I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it in the morning, she would look genuinely confused and say she didn't remember talking in her sleep. But I knew she wasn't asleep. Her breathing was wrong for sleep, her posture too deliberate. She was awake, fully conscious, having conversations with someone or something I couldn't perceive. And always, always, that door remained locked until morning. The breaking point came last week. I had been lying awake, watching her perform her nightly ritual, when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. After she locked the door, she didn't just return to bed. She walked to our bedroom window and stood there for several minutes, perfectly still, looking out into the darkness. Not looking at anything in particular, but looking like she was waiting for something to look back. When I confronted her about the window watching, something shifted between us. Sarah's usual gentle demeanor cracked, just slightly, like ice beginning to fracture under pressure. She sat on the edge of our bed, her hands folded in her lap, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely afraid. "David," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "there are things about my life before you that I haven't shared, things I hoped I'd never have to share." The way she said it made my chest tighten. This wasn't going to be a confession about an ex-boyfriend or some embarrassing family secret. This was something deeper, something that had been eating at her from the inside. I sat down beside her, close enough to offer comfort, but far enough to give her space. "Whatever it is, we can handle it together. It's what marriage that means, right?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. In guilt. Heavy, crushing guilt that seemed to age her 10 years in that moment. "To my family," she began slowly, choosing each word like she was diffusing a bomb. "They're not just far away, David. They're dangerous. Not in the way you might think. Not criminals or anything like that. But they have beliefs, practices that most ways of living people wouldn't understand." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. "What kind of beliefs?" I asked, though part of me wasn't sure I wanted to know. Sarah stood up and walked to our dresser, opening the bottom drawer. Fromaters, she pulled out a small wooden beneath a pile of SUI box, carved with symbols I didn't recognize. The wood was dark, almost black, and looked ancient. My grandmother gave this to me when I turned 18. She said it would protect me from the family curse, but only if I followed certain rules. She set the box on the bed between us like it might explode. Curse. The word felt ridiculous coming out of my mouth, but the seriousness in her expression killed any urge to laugh. Revealing what Sarah opened the box carefully looked like a collection of dried herbs, small bones, and a few items I couldn't identify. The smell that escaped was earthy and sharp, like soil after rain mixed with something medicinal. The women in my family, we carry something, a presence you might call it. It's been passed down for generations, mother to daughter, grandmother to granddaughter. It's not evil exactly, but it's not entirely good either. It's protective, but the cost. My protection comes at mind raced, trying to process what she was telling me. What kind of presence? And what does this have to do with locking our door? Sarah closed the box and held it against her chest like a shield. The presence is strongest at night, especially after moments of intimacy, when our defenses are lowest. The lock isn't to keep people out, David. It's to keep something in, to keep it contained to this room, to this space, so it doesn't spread through the apartment, through the building, through the neighborhood. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I found myself looking toward the door, suddenly very aware of how solid and secure it appeared. You're saying there's something supernatural living inside you? The words sounded insane, but Sarah nodded gravely. Not living inside me exactly, more like attached to me, following me. It's been with my family for over a century, passed down from my great-great-grandmother who made a deal she shouldn't have made. Each generation, one woman carries the burden, keeps it contained, prevents it from causing harm to others. She set the box back on the bed and sat down heavily. The rules are simple, but absolute. Never leave the house after dark unless absolutely necessary. Never have intimate relations without immediately securing the space afterward. Never speak of it to outsiders, and never ever let it realize that you know it's there. My mouth went dry. Let what realize? What exactly are we talking about here? Sarah's hands were shaking now, fine tremors that she tried to control by pressing them together. I don't know what to call it. My grandmother called it the shadow. My mother called it the watcher. All I know is that it feeds on emotional energy, particularly the kind generated during intimate moments. It grows stronger with each feeding, but as long as I follow the rules, it remains dormant most of the time. The conversations I'd overheard, the whispers in the night, the way she stood at the window like she was communicating with something, it was all starting to make a horrifying kind of sense. The phone calls I heard. You weren't talking to a person, were you? Sarah shook her head. I was talking to it, trying to calm it, to reassure it, to keep it satisfied without letting it grow too strong. It's like managing a very dangerous pet that on you at any moment, I could turn felt sick. For 8 months, I'd been living with this thing, this presence, and I'd never known. Every time we made love, every time Sarah performed her ritual, she was protecting me from something I couldn't even comprehend. Why didn't you tell me before we got married? Don't you think I had a right to know? The guilt in her eyes deepened. I hoped it might be different with you. I thought maybe if I found real love, genuine connection, the burden might lift. Some of the older women in my family whispered about it being possible, about love being strong enough to break the cycle. But if anything, being with you has made it stronger. Love amplifies everything, including the things we wish would disappear. I stood up and began pacing the small space between our bed and the wall. My wife, the woman I'd pledged my life to, was telling me she was generted by some ational curse that fed off our intimate moments. It should have sounded like the plot of a bad horror movie, but the fear in her eyes, the careful way she'd been living, the precise nature of her rituals. It all pointed to someone dealing with a very real threat. What happens if you don't follow the rules? What happens if you don't lock the door? Sarah's face went pale. The last woman in my family who broke the rules was my Aunt Rebecca, in love with a man who demanded. She fell to know why she acted so strangely. She told him everything, stopped following the protocols, tried to live a normal life. She paused, swallowing hard. They found her 3 days later. She'd aged 40 years overnight. Her hair was white, her skin was like paper, and her eyes, Sarah shuddered. Her eyes were completely black. The doctors said it was some kind of rapid cellular breakdown, but we knew better. The thing had consumed her completely, taken everything she was and left just a shell behind. The room felt like it was closing in on us. I looked at the door, at the lock that Sarah turned every night with such careful precision, and realized it wasn't just a quirk or a compulsion. It was quite literally a matter of life and death. So what now? We just live like this forever? You perform your rituals and I pretend not to notice? Sarah reached for my hand, and I was fingers were. They're surprised by how cold her might be another way. The box my grandmother gave me, it contains more than just protective herbs. There's a ritual, a way to transfer the burden, but it requires someone to willingly take it on. Someone who knows exactly what they're agreeing to. The implication hit me like a physical blow. You want me to take this thing on myself? Sarah squeezed my hand tighter. Not take it on, exactly. Share it. Split the burden between us so neither one carries the full weight. It's dangerous, and I don't know if it will work, but it might be our only chance at a normal life together. I looked into her eyes, seeing not just the woman I'd married, but the frightened girl who'd been carrying this terrible secret her entire adult life. The lock on our door suddenly seemed like the least strange thing about our marriage. The weight of Sarah's revelation settled between us like a living thing. I found myself staring at that wooden box, at the strange symbols carved into its surface, wondering how my quiet, gentle wife had been carrying this burden alone for so long. "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "About the ritual, about the possibility of sharing it?" Sarah's fingers traced the edges of the box nervously. "My grandmother mentioned it once. Years ago. She said in the old country, there were couples who managed to split the burden, but it required complete trust, complete understanding. Most men couldn't handle the truth, let alone willingly take on part of the curse." I sat back down on the bed, feeling the mattress dip under my weight. Everything I thought I knew about our relationship had shifted in the span of 20 minutes. The careful way she moved through our apartment, the precise timing of her routines, even the way she sometimes looked at me like she was memorizing my face. It all made sense now. What would happen to me? If we did this ritual, what would I experience? Sarah opened the box again and pulled out what looked like a small, rolled piece of parchment tied with black thread. "According to this, you would begin to sense it, feel its presence the way I do. You'd share the responsibility of keeping it contained, keeping it satisfied, also share the protection. But it offers protection?" For the first time since our conversation began, Sarah smiled slightly. "You think it's only a burden, but there are benefits. Enhanced intuition, the ability to sense danger before it arrives, protection from other supernatural influences. My family has survived things that would have destroyed others because of this presence." I thought about the past 8 months, about how safe I'd felt in our apartment, how peaceful our life together had been despite the underlying strangeness. Maybe the protection had been working all along, and I just attributed it to Sarah's calming influence. The whispers I heard at night, you were communicating with it. Sarah nodded slowly. "It gets restless sometimes, especially when it's hungry. After we're intimate, it feeds on the energy we generate, but sometimes that's not enough. I have to reassure it, promise it that more will come, keep it from seeking energy elsewhere." The thought of this thing feeding off our most intimate moments should have disgusted me. but instead I found myself thinking about how Sarah had never seemed depleted afterward, never tired or drained. If anything, she'd always seemed more vibrant, more present. "Show me the ritual," I said quietly. Sarah's eyes widened. "David, you don't understand what you're asking. Once we begin this process, there's no going back. If something goes wrong, if the transfer doesn't work properly, we could both end up like my Aunt Rebecca." I reached over and took her hands in mine, feeling how they trembled slightly. "Sarah, I've been living with this thing for 8 months without knowing it. If it wanted to hurt me, it would have done it by now. Maybe it's been waiting for this moment, for me to understand, for us to make this choice together." She studied my face for a long moment, searching for any sign of doubt or fear. "You're sure? You're absolutely certain you want to do this?" I thought about the alternative. Years of Sarah carrying this burden alone, years of locked doors and whispered conversations, and the constant fear that one mistake would cost us everything. "I'm sure. We're married, Sarah. For better or worse, remember? This definitely qualifies as worse, but I'm not going anywhere." Sarah unrolled the parchment carefully, revealing text written in what looked like several different languages. The writing was faded, but still legible, and I could make out instructions written in English alongside symbols and phrases in languages I didn't recognize. "It has to be done during the full moon," she said, pointing to a section near the top. "That's tomorrow night, and it has to be done in the space where the presence is strongest, which is here, in our bedroom, after we've been intimate." My heart started beating faster. "So tomorrow night, after we make love, instead of you locking the door alone, we perform this ritual together." The ritual itself involves both of us placing our hands on the box while reciting specific words. The presence will manifest more fully than it ever has before, and we'll both feel its full power. If we can maintain our connection to each other while accepting the connection to it, the burden should split between us. I looked around our bedroom, imagining tomorrow night, imagining whatever this presence was becoming visible, tangible. What will it look like when it manifests? Sarah's expression grew distant. "I've only seen it fully manifest once when I was 18 and my grandmother was teaching me the rules. It doesn't have a fixed form. Sometimes it looks like shadow, sometimes like smoke, sometimes almost human, but wrong somehow. The important thing is not to show fear, not to reject it, but also not to welcome it too eagerly." The complexity of what she was describing started to sink in. This wasn't just about splitting a burden. It was about forming a relationship with something that existed outside normal human experience. Have you ever tried to research this? To find out more about what your great-great-grandmother did to start all this? Sarah shook her head. The story was never written down, only passed orally from mother to daughter. All I know is that she made a bargain to protect her family during a time of great danger. The protection came, but so did the presence, and it's been with us ever since. I stood up and walked to our window, looking out at the neighborhood where we'd built our quiet life. Normal houses filled with normal couples dealing with normal problems like bills and in-laws and career stress. None of them were preparing to split a supernatural burden with their spouse. "Sarah," I said without turning around, "what happens if we have children? Does this get passed down to them?" The silence behind me stretched so long that I finally turned to look at her. Tears were streaming down her face, and she was clutching the wooden box against her chest like it might disappear. "Oh, that's why I hoped love might break the cycle," she whispered. "The curse typically passes to the eldest daughter, but some of the old women believed that if the burden was shared equally between husband and wife, if it was contained by genuine love instead of fear, it might not pass to the next generation." The weight of what we were considering became even heavier. We weren't just making a decision about our own lives, but potentially about the lives of children we didn't even have yet. If the ritual failed, if something went wrong, we might be condemning another generation to carry this burden. But if it worked, if love really could contain and transform this presence, We might be breaking a cycle that had trapped Sarah's family for over a century. "Tomorrow night, then," I said, sitting back down beside her. "We do the ritual." Sarah wiped her tears and nodded slowly. "Tomorrow night. But David, there's one more thing you need to know. During the ritual, the presence will test us. It will try to turn us against each other, make us doubt our connection, our love. It feeds on negative emotions just as much as positive ones. And fear and anger are much easier to generate than love and trust." I took the parchment from her hands and studied the instructions more carefully. The text was dense and complicated, but I could make out warnings about maintaining physical contact throughout the process, about not letting go of each other no matter what we saw or felt. "We'll practice," I said. "Tonight, tomorrow during the day. We'll rehearse holding on to each other, staying connected. Whatever this thing throws at us, we'll face it together." For the first time since our conversation began, Sarah's smile reached her eyes. "I love you, David. I love you for listening, for believing me, for being willing to do this." I leaned over and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "I love you too. And tomorrow night, we're going to change everything." As if responding to our words, a cool breeze stirred through the room despite the closed windows. The candles Sarah had lit earlier flickered, and for just a moment, I could have sworn I saw something move in the shadows near our door. Not threatening, exactly, but present. Watching. Waiting. The presence knew what was coming, and somehow, I got the feeling it was as ready for tomorrow night as we were. Sarah carefully rolled up the parchment and placed it back in the wooden box, along with the herbs and other items. "We should get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow is going to be a long day." But as we prepared for bed, as Sarah performed her nightly ritual of locking our door, I noticed something different in the way she moved. There was less tension in her shoulders, less weight in her steps. For the first time in our marriage, she wasn't carrying her burden alone. And as I lay in bed watching her settle beside me, I realized that despite everything she'd told me, despite the fear and uncertainty about what tomorrow would bring, I felt closer to her than ever before. This was what marriage really meant. Not just sharing the good times, but sharing everything, even the impossible things, even the things that existed in the spaces between reality and nightmare. Tomorrow night, we would either free ourselves from this curse or bind ourselves to it more completely than ever before. But whatever happened, we would face it together. The presence stirred in the darkness around us, and for the first time, I didn't find it frightening. Instead, it felt almost like anticipation, like something that had been waiting a very long time for this moment to arrive. The next morning arrived with an unseasonable chill, as if the weather itself was responding to what we'd planned for that evening. Sarah moved through her routine differently, more deliberately. Every action seemed weighted with significance. She made breakfast in silence, her movements precise but somehow distant, like she was all ready was to come. I watched her preparing herself mentally for what from the kitchen doorway, studying the woman I thought I knew completely just 24 hours ago. The morning light caught the angles of her face as she stirred eggs in the pan, and I noticed things I'd somehow missed before. The way her eyes constantly flicked toward the shadows in corners, how her hand would unconsciously reach for the small pendant at her throat whenever she passed our bedroom door. Signs that had been there all along, waiting for me to understand their meaning. She caught me staring and offered a small smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. The weight of tonight hung between us like a third presence at our breakfast table. Neither of us ate much. The food tasted like cardboard, soured by anticipation and fear. Around appetites consumed noon, Sarah disappeared into our bedroom and emerged with thect under her arm. She set wooden box toolkit on our coffee table and began laying out its contents with the care of a surgeon preparing instruments. Each item had its place, its purpose in what was to come. The dried herbs released their sharp, earthy scent into our living room, mixing with the normal smells of coffee and cleaning products to create something that felt both domestic and otherworldly. I found myself studying the symbols carved into the box more closely now that I knew their significance. They weren't random decorations, but protective wards, containment spells, instructions for managing something that existed beyond normal human experience. The wood itself seemed to pulse slightly under my fingertips, as if it contained its own form of life-ruining slowness. Sarah, try. The afternoon dragged on with XCD to read, but I watched her turn the same page 3 times without seeming to absorb any words. I attempted to watch television, but every sound from outside our apartment made me jump. A door slamming in the hallway became a gunshot. Children playing in the courtyard became screaming. My nerves were stretched so thin that ordinary life felt threatening. Around 4 o'clock, Sarah's behavior shifted noticeably. She began moving through the apartment like she was checking something, though she tried to make it look casual. She'd walk to the window and peer out, enjoying the not like someone watching view, but for something specific. Then to the door, where she'd pause with her hand on the lock, listening intently. Then to our bedroom, where she'd stand in the doorway for long moments, head tilted as if hearing sounds I couldn't perceive. Finally, I couldn't stand the tension anymore. I approached her during one of these vigils and placed my hand gently on her shoulder. She jumped like I'd struck her, spinning around with wild eyes before recognition set in. "It's almost time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across our apartment, Sarah lit the candles she'd placed around our bedroom. The flames danced in a way that seemed almost alive, responding to currents of air I couldn't feel. The temperature in the room dropped noticeably, and I found myself checking the windows to see if one had come open. They were all sealed tight. At exactly 9:30, Sarah turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not fear, not determination, but something closer to acceptance. "It's time," she said simply. What happened next in that candlelit room changed both of our lives forever. The ritual worked, but not in the way either of us expected. When the presence finally manifested fully, when we both saw it clearly for the first time, we understood something that Sarah's family had never realized. It wasn't a curse at all. It was a guardian, bound to protect the women of her bloodline from something far worse, something that had been hunting her family for generations, waiting for the protection to weaken, for the rituals to be abandoned. The locked door wasn't keeping something in, it was keeping something out. And now, with both of us sharing the burden, with our love strengthening the bond, that protection had never been stronger. The presence that had seemed so frightening became our ally, our shield against forces that most people never even know exist. Sarah still locks the door after we make love, but now I understand why, and sometimes I'm the one who turns that key. Because some secrets aren't meant to be exposed, some doors are meant to stay locked, and some love stories require a guardian watching from the shadows. That was 6 months ago. Sarah is pregnant now, and we've learned that when love truly binds 2 people together, when they're willing to share even the impossible burdens, curses can become blessings. Our child will be born free of this burden, protected but not bound, loved but not haunted. Sometimes the strongest locks aren't meant to keep love out. They're meant to keep it safe.